to a moving graduation speech that you gave. The courage that it took.
So the first thing I want to say to you is that I'm sorry.
It's about being authentic.
Diverse, vibrant, and open-minded. And you are going to be part of this movement. Because when the foundation is broken, so are we.
Meghan Markle's so-called surprise graduation speech to her old high school unintentionally exposes the linguistic tactics she uses to persuade people. However, the tactics also suggest problems with her communication style, problems that have led to controversies over the years, no matter how much she tries to get people to think otherwise.
What ends up being inflammatory, it seems, is people's interpretation of it. But if you listen to what I actually say, it's not controversial.
So if people think she's saying something controversial, the problem lies with them.
There was no guidance. But even down to like the national anthem. That's me late at night Googling, what's the national, I've got to learn this. I need to learn these 30 hymns for church. And also concerns and conversations about how dark his skin might be when he's born. It's not controversial.
What?
Which tactics does Meghan use, and why are they problematic? Let's find out. Hang on, because things are about to get vibrant. Time to get the party started.
Immaculate Heart High School, graduating class of 2020. For the past couple weeks, I've been planning on saying a few words to you for your graduation.
If Meghan's been planning this for a couple of weeks, I'm sure this speech is going to be profound and specific, right?
And as we've all seen over the last week, what is happening in our country and in our state and in our hometown of LA has been absolutely devastating.
With the pronouns we and our, Meghan does what most speakers do. She presupposes that there is an audience that already agrees with her. In other words, she constitutes an audience which might not otherwise exist outside of her rhetoric. If you've seen my previous videos, you'll know that Meghan and a lot of other empowering speakers try to get certain demographics to view themselves as group members first and foremost, and not as individuals. Group members who allegedly think and want the same because they happen to share the same innate characteristics.
These are very similar projects because they're about women who are empowering each other. But if I'm able to share that blazer and be part of another woman's success story, then that's community. Women's empowerment, strong community-based projects. As women, it is 100% our responsibility, I think, to support and uplift each other, rallying around each other and say, I want to help you. I've just always loved understanding women and our stories and the way that we see ourselves is reflected back to us. Sometimes accurately and sometimes, much to our disservice, inaccurately in what we see in media. We have a responsibility in all of that. The systemic change has to happen at the same time as the cultural change is happening. Because if you're reading something terrible about a woman, why are you sharing it with your friends? Why are you choosing to put that out in the world?
Groupthink-based rhetoric is the easiest way for politicians and advertisers to upset and ultimately control people. It stops people from thinking too much about the fact that despite their shared innate characteristics, they're quite different from each other in terms of dreams, opinions, etc. That's also why the modern, agenda-driven definition of diversity doesn't make sense. Diversity means diversity of thought first and foremost, and two people who might look alike don't necessarily think alike. Meghan emphasizes this implied shared identity.
In our country and in our state, and in our hometown of LA.
Next, Meghan continues her appeal to people's emotion.
And I wasn't sure what I could say to you. I wanted to say the right thing, and I was really nervous that I wouldn't, or that it would get picked apart. And I realized the only wrong thing to say is to say nothing.
Saying that the only wrong thing is to say nothing is a way of taking the edge off the political views or mindset she's about to express. with the words.
Get picked apart.
She shows self-awareness by expressing the concern she has for herself, concern about how people will perceive this politicizing speech. Strictly speaking, since nothing means nothing, saying nothing can be a thing you say, but let's not overthink that.
The only wrong thing to say is to say nothing.
Her
I wanted to
self-awareness
say
is
the
further
right
underlined
thing.
by her claim to wanting to say the right thing. How often does that happen, I wonder? How often do speakers like Meghan say what they know is going to be popular at the expense of truth or meaning? Meghan's busy branding what she's about to say as authentic, which is a way of guiding people's impression of her, something that she has a habit of doing.
It was at that moment that I realized the magnitude of my actions. At the age of 11, I had created my small level of impact.
Because George Floyd's life mattered, and Breonna Taylor's life mattered, and Philando Castile's life mattered, and Tamir Rice's life mattered. And so did so many other people whose names we know and whose names we do not know. Stephon Clark, his life mattered.
With this, Meghan presupposes that it isn't obvious to everyone that their lives mattered, otherwise there'd be no reason for her to state the obvious. This is a sign of the us and them discourse that she emphasizes in the following: the good guys and the bad guys. Meghan uses these cases as so-called synecdoches, parts of the problem that are used to represent the whole, because with this, Meghan implies systemic problems, because she doesn't mention all the other tragedies that happen on a daily basis to all people, irrespective of their innate characteristics. Thus, synecdoches are used to insinuate that things are more or less out of control in one or more areas of society. Critics, however, would object that in several of the cases Meghan mentions, the officers involved weren't sentenced to prison. Thus, critics would say that the crux of the matter isn't whether a person's life matters, as Meghan portrays it as, but that the justice system didn't sentence the officers to prison. In political terms, what Meghan's doing here is that she's playing on a certain demographic's fears and wishes in order to come across as a supporter or even savior of this demographic. That's because today, voters notice single issues and judge politicians on how they respond to these single issues. Next, it's time for another political tactic: personal narratives. Narratives are designed to get the audience to identify themselves with the narrator who's one of us.
And I was thinking about this moment when I was a sophomore in high school. I was 15, and as you know, sophomore year is the year that we do volunteer work, which is a prerequisite for graduating. And I remember my teacher at the time, one of my teachers, Miss Palia, said to me before I was leaving for a day of volunteering, "Always remember to put others' needs above your own fears." And that has stuck with me through my entire life, and I have thought about it more in the last week than ever before. So the first thing I want to say to you is that I'm sorry.
What's implied here is that Meghan is brave because she's putting other people's needs above her fears, allegedly. So this self-praise is another way in which Meghan guides people's impression of her, as if that wasn't already clear from her emphasis on volunteer work.
Before I was leaving for a day of volunteering.
However, again, it also points to Meghan's self-awareness of how people are going to perceive this speech. I'm sorry speaks volumes about Meghan's groupthink, as if she can apologize on behalf of one group she allegedly represents, even though no one asked her to another group. Thus, this apology speaks to Meghan's characteristic sense of self-importance.
It was several years ago, in 2014, that I was first invited to be a counselor at One Young World. Young, ambitious, advocating for the things I deeply and profoundly believed in. And I was invited to pull up a seat at the table and prove that I belonged. But One Young World saw in me the present and the future. My life had changed rather significantly. I was now married, and I was now a mom.
And she continues, apologizing.
I am so sorry that you have to grow up in a world where this is still present. I was 11 or 12 years old when I was just about to start Immaculate Heart Middle School in the fall, and it was the LA riots, which was also triggered by a senseless act of racism.
Also, Meghan says, making a causal connection between the riots and the cases she's mentioned, that the motive behind them is the same, allegedly. At first, she was being vague.
In a world where this is still present, which was
but the
also
adverb underlines where she stands, politically. Meghan phrases it like this.
Which was also triggered by...
Almost as if the riots were an inevitable consequence of this horrific case. However, considering that over 60 people died during the riots, an objection would be that riots can't be explained this way, that a riot is the most dangerous consequence of groupthink and thus counterproductive to change. However, that doesn't stop Meghan from dwelling on what she claims to have seen. Dwelling on this is essential to the groupthink that's part of a constitutive rhetoric, getting the audience to think that it's the same we today as it was back then. That's what the first and second ideological effects are about.
And I remember the curfew, and I remember rushing back home, and on that drive home, seeing ash fall from the sky and smelling the smoke and seeing the smoke billow out of buildings and seeing people run out of buildings carrying bags and looting. And I remember seeing men in the back of a van, and I remember pulling up to the house and seeing the tree that had always been there completely charred.
No one asked what she remembers, but in case the audience still doesn't know who Meghan wants them to notice in this narrative, Meghan doesn't mind spelling it out for them.
And I remember. So I am sorry that in a way we have not gotten the world to the place that you deserve it to be.
The world will never get to the place where all people deserve it to be. Rhetorical apologies combined with playing on people's indignation are how politicians make their message sound more special and profound than it is. In its most extreme sense, it's known as savior rhetoric. Rhetoric that makes anything other than voting for the politician in question seem like the end of the world. Meghan isn't interested in people's votes yet, but she is interested in getting the demographic she addresses to unite around her and her message. That's what the third ideological effect is about, getting people to act. The first two effects are used for so-called interpellation, which is when audience members recognize themselves in the speech by having a certain self-understanding or self-perception ascribed to them by the speaker. Identification makes persuasion easier, and persuasion is necessary in getting the audience to act. Next, we see the third effect.
The other thing, though, that I do remember about that time was how people came together. And we are seeing that right now. We are seeing that from the sheriff in Michigan or the police chief in Virginia. We are seeing people stand in solidarity. We are seeing communities come together and to uplift. And you are going to be part of this movement.
This excerpt demonstrates the power of rhetoric, the speaker getting the audience to go from one mood to the other. Right after, she's described in detail how unfair everything is, encouraging the audience to feel disillusioned. She turns to a community discourse.
And we are seeing that right now. We are seeing that.
The purpose of having audiences feel disillusioned is to make the speaker seem that more compassionate and loving, and to make his or her solution or pretend solution seem that more profound. Because what exactly is Meghan's solution or message?
And to uplift. And you are going to be part of this movement.
What does that entail specifically? In the following, Meghan has a hard time specifying that, and thus has a hard time specifying the third effect, even though that's supposed to be the most powerful part of a speaker's performance.
I know that this is not the graduation that you envisioned, and this is not the celebration that you imagined. But I also know that there's a way for us to reframe this for you and to not see this as the end of something, but instead to see this as the beginning of you harnessing all of the work, all the values, all the skills that you have embodied over the last 4 years, and now you channel that. Now all of that work gets activated.
What work? Which values? And how should these be harnessed or channeled specifically? Now I see the hard work that went into the speech.
For the past couple weeks, I've been planning on saying, now you get to be part of rebuilding. And I know sometimes people say, how many times do we need to rebuild? Well, you know what? We are going to rebuild and rebuild and rebuild until it is rebuilt.
In case you're wondering, yes, Meghan did say rebuild 6 times in 10 seconds.
Rebuilding, rebuild, rebuild and rebuild and rebuild, rebuilt.
And what does this rebuilding entail? And how is this rebuilding connected to the audience's work and values? At least, Meghan did include a rebuttal of her own claim.
And I know sometimes people say, how many times do we need to rebuild?
Most likely because she knows she isn't saying anything new or meaningful. Perhaps it would have been better to say nothing.
The only wrong thing to say is to say nothing.
The thing about rebuttals is that they're only useful in case the speaker has a plan that he or she specifies and which contradicts the rebuttal. Otherwise, the rebuttal ends up being the thing that many people remember. Next, Meghan continues with cliches that are devoid of actual content.
Because when the foundation is broken, so are we. You are going to lead with love. You are going to lead with compassion. You are going to use your voice. You are going to use your voice in a stronger way than you've ever been able to. Because most of you are 18 or you're going to turn 18, so you're going to vote.
Voice is an all-time favorite on this channel.
What's interesting is I hear a lot of people saying when speaking about girls' empowerment, finding and knowing their worth, or women's empowerment as well, you'll often hear people say, well, you're helping women find their voices. And I fundamentally disagree with that because women don't need to find a voice. They have a voice. They need to feel empowered to use it.
What kind of love? What kind of compassion? Without definitions, words like these are empty and much too easy to try and monopolize, as people will call completely different things acts of love or compassion, depending on their beliefs and opinions. And next, it's time for more of the us and them discourse, because that'll bring all people closer together.
You are going to have empathy for those who don't see the world through the same lens that you do, because with as diverse and vibrant and open-minded as I know the teachings at Immaculate Heart are, I know you know that Black Lives Matter.
By attributing vague and ambiguous terms like diverse, vibrant, and open-minded to the audience she's trying to persuade, the us in her speech, the opposite side, them, is the negative opposite to these terms. With this, Meghan overlooks or ignores that almost all people, regardless of political stance, know that all people's lives matter, which includes the lives of specific demographics. You don't have to go to this high school to know that. Thus, the connection Meghan makes between the vibrant and open-minded teachings and knowing that people's lives matter sounds forced and contrived. How does she know that the teachings are vibrant and open-minded, the way she defines these vague terms? What if the students or other people have different definitions? Is it vibrant and open-minded to assume that people who might share the same innate characteristics but are very different individuals have the same definitions? Once again, it's made clear that Meghan doesn't mind speaking on behalf of a collective, the audience she's tried to constitute in this speech, and telling it what to think and feel. So could Meghan be the spokesperson that no one asked for?
So I am already excited for what you are going to do in the world. You are equipped, you are ready, we need you, and you are prepared. I am so proud to call each of you a fellow alumni, and I'm so eager to see what you're going to do. Please know that I am cheering you on all along the way. I am exceptionally proud of you. And I'm wishing you a huge congratulations on today, the start of all the impact you're going to make in the world as the leaders that we all so deeply crave. Congratulations, ladies, and thank you in advance.
Because Meghan's rhetoric is completely determined by her groupthink, She obviously has no problem saying how exceptionally proud she is, even though she doesn't know the students individually, and even though she can't actually be exceptionally proud of someone in advance, because she doesn't know what they're going to do individually. By the sound of it, Meghan's going to cheer them on, no matter what they do, because they're one of us. What a truly vibrant and open-minded mindset to have. I've been using the word audience wrong because this speech isn't primarily directed at the students at this high school. The speech is directed at a much larger audience. It's designed to get this larger audience to see how compassionate and humble Meghan is. This is self-branding masked as a speech. In an interview, Meghan talked about this speech, and what she says is quite revealing. As expected, unfortunately, the interviewer programs the audience what to think about Meghan's achievement first.
Just to prepare for this interview, I listened to a moving graduation speech that you gave. The courage that it took, the effortless courage that it took to keep bringing these things forward, which you do.
Yes, I mean, I think it's about being authentic. And
while shaking her head no, she repeats the word authentic from her script. And no, she's not done repeating.
so I just spoke from the heart, and that's probably why it doesn't look polished, and that's why it doesn't feel perfect, but that's also why it's authentic.
And third time's a charm.
Then I think it's very easy to just live with truth and live with authenticity, and that's how I choose to move through the world.
Because as we all know, when something's truly authentic, you totally have a need to say that it's authentic. Once again, Meghan shows how self-aware she is.
And that's probably why it doesn't look polished, and that's why it doesn't feel perfect.
Very little in life feels perfect. So by appealing to this extreme, Meghan makes her speech seem great and authentic, which is the point. Click the like button and subscribe for more vibrant videos. I hope you have an authentic day.